welcome on stage Suki Kim and Narayan Lakshman. Ms. Kim is a South Korea-born American investigative journalist, novelist, and the only writer ever to have lived undercover in North Korea for immersive journalism. Author of the NY Times bestseller, Without You, There Is No Us, her articles regularly appear in the New York Times, the New York Review of Books, and the New Republic, where she's a contributing editor. In conversation with her is Mr. Lakshman, associate editor at The Hindu and an author. For 6 years, until November 2015, Mr. Lakshman was the newspaper's US correspondent based in Washington, D.C. He now writes for the editorial pages, besides curating special editorial projects. I request you, sir, to take the conversation forward.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for coming here on Pongal. Appreciate it. Nice audience. We have a rather interesting talk this morning from Suki Kim, who, as you know, is a South Korean-American investigative journalist. And her book, Without You, There Is No Us, is a fabulous insider account of what is happening in North Korea, which is otherwise a complete black box for most of us. And this morning, she's going to actually start by sharing with you a presentation which will have sort of graphic elements, photographs, which will give us a bigger picture, a visual image of the North and of her engagement with it. And then we'll have a discussion, and then we'll have a Q&A. So over to you, Suki.
Hi, thank you for all coming out. I just want to start our now 50-minute long discussion on this topic together with a video. So if you would play the video one. So that is a song called Without You, There Is No Us, which ended up being the title of my book. It's a song that was played everywhere in North Korea all the time. So it gives you a little bit of an idea. Obviously, there's only one topic there, the great leader. Without him, there is not any of us, which is the idea of North Korea. And of course, there's the other idea, which is what North Korea is founded on, which is the hatred of the United States. So why that is, and that now, as we're talking further about the topic, will bring us to why we have the current situation, which is Trump versus Kim Jong-un summit is latest, the world's interest in the topic. So the images, please. Oh, sorry, this. So this is a pretty recent photo, NASA photo of what North Korea is. So if you can see, above that is China, right below this will be Japan, and there's the Korean Peninsula split in half. Seoul, South Korea, one of the richest nations in Asia, and there's North Korea, which is just a black hole. There's nothing there. So that gives you some sense of what North Korea is facing. And whoever says the gulag state of North Korea is similar to other current horrible places around the world, I don't think it's true. I don't think we've seen anything like this, where the entire country is entirely shut off from the rest of the world. And the extent to which this country is shut off from the rest of the world, we'll begin to see. And so this guy, I think at this point, is somewhat familiar to many of you. He's the current great leader, the third great leader since the foundation of North Korea, Kim Jong-un. So when you arrive at the country, this is, that's the first great leader, Kim Il-sung. Next to him is the second great leader, his son, Kim Jong-il, since it's the grandfather, father, and the son who've been at the helm of North Korea for 70 years. And as we begin to talk about exactly what this problem of North Korea, crisis of North Korea is, I think we just need to literally, very quickly talk about why Korea is the way it is. So Korea was a 5,000-year-old kingdom. And in 1910, it gets colonized by Japan for 35 years, 1945. Those years coincide with World War I and World War II. 1945, Korea gets liberated by the Allies, except when the Allies liberated it, they split the country in half. So that's the creation of North Korea, the South Korea, in the hands of the Russia and America. So Russia took North and picked their own leader, which is Kim Il-sung, the original great leader. So the original great leader was actually started by the Cold War, but also the whole idea was founded by Russia and the United States. The United States then picked their own favorite person, and that person was Lee Seung-man, who was the first president of South Korea, who was US-educated leader. So what we have, South Korea and North Korea was actually a Cold War product, and when North Korea attacked South Korea in 1950, that's the Korean War that people think about. So people think Korean War divided Korea, but that's actually not what happened. It happened before 1945. So the war that happened from 1950 to 1953, that war, which then cut up Korea, which then maintained that division, till this day, in 2019, Korea is divided. That war caused millions and millions of civilian death, casualty, but further, it also split up families, millions of families, who thought that they'll see each other next week, the following week, the following week. That never happened. Korea was permanently divided. Not a letter, not a phone call, nothing. 3 generations. It's still divided today. Sorry. Wait, hold on. Okay. So this great leader, the extent to which the great leader is everything in that world. So these pins, every citizen wears them. So every citizen wears them at all time on their chest, close to their heart, because each one is marked by the great leader. The current human rights crisis that North Korea is, under the great leader system, it has political prisoners. The numbers are approximate 100,000 to 200,000 political prisoners, about between 10 to 20 political gulags. We never know the exact number because nothing in there is verifiable, because no one can really go into North Korea for real and research anything. So we can just about approximate what horrific stuff is happening in that country. So with the Kim Jong-un regime, we're going to begin talking about is that first thing he did, he came to power in 2011, youngest leader. First thing he did is 2013, December, he had his uncle executed. That's Jang Sang-taek, who's the number 2 guy in North Korea, was, but no longer. Of course, there was a brother, if you remember, Kim Jong-nam. So Kim Jong-nam was the original, he's the first son. He was meant to be the great leader. But somehow Kim Jong-un rose to power, who's the 3rd son. And soon after he came to power in 2016, he had his brother killed at Kuala Lumpur airport using a chemical toxin called VX agent. So that was the next family member who was killed. And then I don't know if you remember Otto Warmbier case, which is an American student who went there kind of by accident. He was on his way to China on an exchange program, but he decided to just pop by North Korea for a couple of days, and then he pulled out one of those great leader posters from the wall. Supposedly, we of course don't know for sure, but he came out as a corpse. He was sentenced to 15 years of gulag labor based on that act, and he then was imprisoned. And finally, when he came out, well, when the U.S. government brought him out, he was a corpse. So, I mean, he came out vegetable, and he died right after. So, I mean, this was a brutal reminder of what North Korea really is today. And I wrote actually op-ed about that, because another thing that was really disturbing about that case is that, you know, Gulag isn't really a vacation spot. So why we're not taking North Korea's reality, stark reality, as serious as we do is a question I think we must question. Why we're not actually talking about the human condition of what is happening in that world that's been locked away from us for 70 years. So it is declared by the United Nations as, the exact quote is, the gravity, scale, and nature of these violations reveal a state that does not have any parallel in the contemporary world. I think just last week, the United Nations again declared North Korea a prison state. Of course, then, currently, a lot of things are happening, which the summit happened between Trump and Kim Jong-un, where somehow things are meant to improve. This summit I went to cover in Singapore this past year. And these are some of the photos from the scene. This is Trump-Kim Summit 2017-18. And 3,000 reporters gathered to cover the event. But of course, everybody just stuck in a TV room watching the summit from the TV screen. So all the reporters were just climbing the desk to take the pictures from the TV screen of what was happening. So that this was literally from behind the scene of the Singapore summit. So I did a New Yorker piece about how we were trapped in there, and we were basically, reporters were just reporting each other because there was no story. What the real story was, however, why the Singapore summit is happening right now, and yet again, we're talking about the second summit that's possibly happening in Vietnam in February. So all of those things, why it's happening currently, I just did a recent feature for the New Republic. Why America needs it, why North Korea needs it, and why South Korea needs it, who's really behind the whole operation. And this idea, PR, moment of peace on the peninsula, is that really true? Because we haven't seen anything on paper. There's literally nothing about nuclear weapons, nothing about sanctions, just lots and lots of media show about peace on the Korean peninsula. So I began my investigation into North Korea from 2002. I grew up in South Korea. I am a product of a separated families. And that's not that unusual. Many, many, many Koreans are coming from families who've been separated by the war. In my case, my mother's brother, he was 17 at the time, We all lived in South Korea. When the war happened in 1950, the bombs came from North. He was taken to, because they first, when North came to South, they first took away young men and women. Women, they could be used as nurses. Young men could be captured and used as soldiers. So those were the first ones to be kidnapped. So he was taken to North, the first son of my grandmother. So Korean mothers, I think, are kind of like Indian mothers. Your son is everything. And she never, ever got over that. She waited. She just waited. Because losing your son, like your son dying, is very different from your son disappearing in front of you to the other side of the town. So it's just a few hours away, Pyongyang. So he was taken there. They said, the government said now there's a wall between North and South. There never has been. So she just thought that that wall will not be there next week. So she never moved at the house because he's going to walk back home. And how he's going to find his way home. So she didn't move and waited until she died. So I describe in my book as my grandmother dying of a heartbreak because her life was about waiting. And I think this is what drove me to write the book because I imagined what that means. Not one mother, but a generation of mothers who just waited for their loved beloved, or that son who ended up on the other side of the wall to wait to see your mother. And just thinking, please, the government, take the wall away. Just didn't happen. So I went there in 2002 for the first time for the celebration of Kim Jong-il's 60th birthday celebration. Kim Jong-il is the last great leader. That's when 2002 came in the heels of the Great Famine of North Korea, where a tenth of population died. North Korean population is 25 million. So what that means is between maybe 1 to 3 million civilians died from famine. So I walked in right after that famine, so country was devastated. Beyond that, though, the world I saw in there was undescribable. What that means is it's not something I could explain to anybody. It's a country, you walk in, they take away your visa, your cell phone, passport, minder takes over, and then you go see what they allow you to see. Citizens are not allowed to travel between towns, not allowed to leave the country. There is no television program that is not about the great leader, only the great leader from 5:30 till 11:30. There's only one newspaper, 6 pages long, only about the great leader. Every song is a great leader song. Everything you see, every building is marked with a sign of the great leader. There is actually nothing that is not about the great leader. So how do you explain this world to the rest of this kind of a society to the rest of the world? It's hard to imagine, So that's how the obsession with North Korea began. So you have to bow to his statue when you walk in. That's a great leader flower, because flowers are named after the great leader. That's a train, that's a great leader train. This painting was constructed to honor his birthday in February. In February, people were dancing to songs called February is Spring. In Korea, February is deep winter. But the great leader is born, thus February is spring. So this display of great leader flowers, I had to attend to watch them. Every organization around the whole country came up with these kind of displays, and then there was an exhibition of it. Just went on and on and on and on and on the exact same stuff, over and over and over. So deja vu, it sounds exotic, but actually really boring to have to look at the same flower over and over and over and over and be told how great the great leader is over and over and over and over. And I imagine that's how North Koreans have to live. Hear the same story all their lives about one person. That's the Tower of Juche. Juche is their foundation philosophy. Very simplistically, Juche means self-reliance. Self-reliance is a nicer way of saying isolationism. So what that means is we are alone. We are not going to deal with anybody else. That's really what Juche is. What that also means, it's an idea that's really common in an abusive societies and households. If you're isolated from any support network, then you have to rely on the great leader, no one else. That's all the people dancing in February. That was deep winter, saying that it's actually spring. Because the great leader, another metaphor for the great leader is the sun. He's always likened to the sun. So his birthday is called the Day of the Sun, because the sun was born. It's a warm day, which it's not. So when we talk about fake news and what is truth and what is not truth, that becomes a really, really, really central concept when you're studying North Korea. Because everything is made up. All the children dancing for the great leader celebration, and it was like they were doing like petals of Kim Jong-il flowers kind of stuff. It sounds, fun, but actually it was really difficult to watch because all they have done was practice for this one guy's birthday. Rounded up from around the world. These are sort of typical Workers' Party leaders that I had to spend time with my first time, because I also did go undercover my first time. I posed first time as a Kim Jong-il loyalist. That was how I went in 2002. I pursued North Korea for a decade, going in there 5 times. And I interviewed over 100 defectors around the region. You only get really one side of the story from defectors because they're usually the poor people from the border area. So then what's happening in the inside country, right? So then you really need to try to approach North Korea from every different angle. I traveled through Mongolia, Thailand, Laos, trying to go through all the defector routes, talking to North Koreans along the way. And then finally ended up living inside for 6 months in Pyongyang, because I realized the only way to get a story about North Korea, the real story, you have to go inside and live there. There was no other option, because everything about the country is fake and made up. Anything you end up getting by going in there for 3 to 5 days, which I have done, you end up just getting a PR version. So if you want to be a press agent for the great leaders regime, you can go in there for 3 days and write up something. But to be a journalist, there's no way that you can understand anything from that short times. There's a building in Pyongyang that says, "We are happy." So finally, that's when I got the job. Not a job because it was not paid. So it was when I went in as a missionary into North Korea, posing as one. That was the visa. That's a school that we'll talk about. It was a male school, men only, and the walkway was in circle like that, which means you're watched from every corner. That's me teaching a class with all the great leader signs hanging. All my students doing group exercise, because everything was done in groups. You never do anything on your own. That's a great leader building and great leader study hall and the great leader monument, Forever Tower, because it says our great leader is eternally with us. So basically, it's like a church, those 2 temples. And it's in every North Korean communities. It was, I think, my students taking a test, but electricity is cut all the time, so they couldn't look at the test paper. It was really a memorable moment. It's an election booth, and there is no election in North Korea, but they create one for foreigners to come and take pictures, so it looks like they have an election. There is a church I was taken to, but there is no church in North Korea because there's no freedom of religion, but they build a church so that it looks like they have a freedom of religion. So those are the North Korean choir. I thought of it as actually kind of a fun job. It's a job for them to pretend to be Christian when they're not Christian. But also, I am not Christian, and I had to pretend to be Christian to get in there. And which is a longer story that I actually had to join a group of evangelical Christians who were pouring money into North Korea. So this foreign evangelicals is how I came in as a part of. there's no freedom of religion in North Korea. So they made a deal with the North Korean government to pretend not to be Christians to go into North Korea. So they were pretending, Christians were pretending not to be Christians. I was pretending to be Christian, who's pretending not to be Christian. And those North Koreans were pretending to be Christian. So it was really like lots and lots of lies in one room. And I sat there and I thought, what is this world? Nobody's telling the truth. That's a mountain with all the great leader inscriptions on it, because it's the most famous mountain in North Korea. In the Korean peninsula, South Koreans cannot go because they cannot go, right? Turns out North Koreans cannot go either because they're not allowed. Every surface was this stuff. All it says is like great leader is great, right? Thousands and thousands of surface. So the mountain belongs to the great leader. I think it was one of the last moments I saw these young men I lived with and learned to really, 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 really love, who also were going to be the future leadership of North Korea. It was them watching Harry Potter. I was miraculously able to show it to them and to see the reaction. You see, the size is really small because every wall is covered with those great leader slogans, which are all like, they're not complicated. They say things like, student must study by Kim Jong-il, you know, but you couldn't move them. And every surface it had that, but you couldn't move it, which means that you cannot project that movie to a real size, because there is no plain white blank space in North Korea. He died, Kim Jong-il, my last day. And the great leader, and for a moment, it was around Christmas time, and when I was told that, I thought somehow, oh my God, like I got confused for a second, like God, isn't something to do, Christmas something to do with Jesus? You know, because I've been pretending to be Christian the whole time. And then I realized, oh, actually, God, it's about him dying when I was told the news. And I realized, thank God, maybe the world will change. Of course, the world didn't change. Of course, the writer in me, however, thought, here's the final chapter of the book. I think that's it. Before we begin the discussion, can we play briefly that second video? So those were the young men I lived with, my students, who were singing great leader songs and just going to a cafeteria. They marched like that 3 times a day. So in my book, I describe them, North Koreans, as either slaves or soldiers, because there was nothing else but between the two.
Thank you, Suki. That was a fantastic presentation, and it really gave us a real-time sort of glimpse into what is happening there, which we don't tend to see every day. What I must say is Suki's book it maintains that balance of journalistic rigor where she has meticulous attention to detail, from the kind of clothing people wear to the signs you see everywhere to the various exchanges she has. But you can also get a sense of the emotion and what she was saying about people literally being lost across the wall, across the border. And I just wanted to read one paragraph, which actually is a personal account of what happened with her own family. And it's, if you'll permit me, it's a paragraph. So she starts saying, shouts are coming from somewhere. Somebody panicked, mother or father, a desperate voice pleading with young men to give up their spaces to women and children. Before the shouts register, before my grandmother has a moment to ponder the words or protest, the 17-year-old rises. I'll go, he says, then reassures her. I'll find another ride, mother, don't worry. Then just as quickly, he is out of sight, followed by the sound of the engine. It all happens in a blink, and my grandmother, bewildered by this unexpected twist, turns frantically in the direction of where her son has gone, and the truck is moving suddenly, too fast for her to think clearly. And only later does it occur to her that she should have jumped off right then and dragged him back. She should have sought out the one who had shouted and gouged his eyes out. This is war, and a split-second decision is costly. There she is, my grandmother, dumbstruck on a speeding truck without her oldest child, the baby that lived. So this tells you about the sort of the poignancy of the loss that is felt on both sides. And I guess, do you feel that this has led to a kind of a resentment between the two Koreas because it is so personal, it is so intimate?
Because I think that the world forgot. People often refer to the Korean War as a forgotten war, and that is not true to Koreans. The war is everywhere when you go to Korea today, even South Korea, which is a land of Gangnam style and all this Korean pop. But you know, when the country is divided in half like that, and there is actually no communication allowed, not even a single phone call, it's a violence. And I think that if you were to pass that violence on to the next generation, which is I think what happened. Also, I think one thing that really I always felt obsessed with, maybe that's why I pursued it, some might say, on this crazy mission of pursuing North Korea, is because I kept thinking about the generation who got trapped in this sorrow. Those who literally got trapped, missing somebody, because I think missing somebody when they're nearby and you can't get to them, that's why kidnapping is really horrific. A child being kidnapped is not, you cannot wish fate worse than that, right? Missing that child. And I kept thinking, so people were, millions were going through this, and at the same time, all these people who, all this injustice happened, and in movies, someone else comes and writes something about it. Door opens and the rescue team comes and you get rescued. None of that happened, they all died. Because we're now in the third generation. So isn't that a writer's duty? I think writer's duty is to tell that story because that generation's gone. Time's over to undo that suffering in any way. So I think it's constant, and I think they have passed that on to the next generation, the Korean Peninsula, and I think I do describe the place as a diseased nation. How do you recover from that?
Diseased nation. Well, I mean, in that context, I mean, and looking at this taking a step back and looking at the broader politics, there were the two summits that happened last year. There was Trump and Kim Jong-un, but there was also the meeting between the North and South Korean leaders, which happened on the border. And to me, there seemed to be, just watching from afar, there was a palpable difference between them. Was there a sense of meaning, or more meaning, in the meeting behind the North and South Korean leaders? Because that was about, in a sense, taking stock of the entire history of pain, of loss, and still being able to talk. So did that have the same meaning for the Korean people or not?
I think that for Koreans, I mean, I think that Moon Jae-in's popularity just soared. Moon Jae-in, the South Korean president. So from a politician point of view, Moon Jae-in, there was a parliamentary election was coming up when the summit happened. So politically, there's a reason why suddenly this happy Korea image had to constantly be broadcast all the time. Starting from the Olympics of February 2018 on to the summits that happened between the South Korean and North Korean leaders. However, how much of that relates to practical alleviation of actual citizens of North Korea, it's hard to see. From Americans' point of view, it also has to do with what Donald Trump is facing, what the North Korean issue, how much is that used as a distraction from the Russia investigation, because in reality, just nothing is on paper when it comes to that American summit. So I personally see a lot of it as sort of a PR move for all three leaders, including Kim Jong-un, because for him to kill off his uncle and his brother back to back like that, he's insecure of his legitimacy in the position. So I think that a lot of this has to do with how much his own position is, he's trying to strengthen that within his own constituents. So I think it's about those three leaders, personally, and their own internal power.
And I mean, I was thinking about that point you made just now about the state of insecurity, because it's also, as outsiders, it's fascinating for us to think how, despite the enormous state of deprivation, we've seen the famines of the 1990s in which 3 million people died, what you said about the gulags still being there, and I think you say 200,000 people are still there. So despite this, and despite the sense of poverty that exists even now, the sort of opaque North Korean state is somehow able to keep things under control and even take on the West and literally play a game of cat and mouse in the nuclear politics with the West. So how is that made possible is my question to you. And let me again, if you permit me, to read a small paragraph just to highlight the extent of deprivation that you see. And this again goes back to Suki Kim's own experience going there. Jones said that I would need a refrigerator, as well as toilet paper and butter. Was there no way of getting those things there, I wondered. You bring everything to Pyongyang, I was told. I wired money to Joan so that she could purchase a refrigerator and have it shipped from China, but I was not sure whether a block of frozen butter would survive the long-haul flight from New York to Pyongyang. There were so many things, it turned out, and that I could not do without. You would think that being a writer, I would have put books at the top of my list. But in fact, books were the last thing on my mind. The things I packed were more basic. An extra pair of glasses, disposable contact lenses, sanitary napkins, ibuprofen, vitamins, and antibiotics of all kinds, plus as many protein bars as I could jam in my suitcases. So how does a country where none of this is available not see its people clamor for more?
I think that maybe the most, like an easy way to think of it as North Korea is realize, dissecting it into all the things that could control a person. So first, there's a military, right? It's in North Korea, all young men from the ages of 17 to 27 have to serve a military duty of 10 years. Except the elite. Some elites don't do it or less, but most do. So what that means is basically everybody, every young man is a soldier there. So the military is considered the largest army in the world. So there's a force. And then there is actual cutting people off from communication. Communication is really the way people gather. When you think about people, I think so, because it's someone else's business, people wonder, how come North Koreans don't just rise up against their government? Well, in order to rise up into a revolution, you need to somehow communicate with each other. There is no internet there, not at all. There is a postal system, but it doesn't really work that well. Like you might send a letter, it could take 10 days or a month. Also, there's a system of surveillance. Everybody's watching everyone. Every North Korean meets once a week to report on each other. You also, which means that whatever you said will be brought up at that meeting on Saturday. So you can't do that. Also, they all have duties, and this is what I observed through my students in just living with them. They would never tell you this if you were to interview them, but it came out little by little while living with them. They are so busy, and before this, when I was interviewing defectors all the time, they would tell me always that we're so busy. And I don't think, because I don't come from that system, I don't think I really understood what that really means. What are you doing busy all the time? Because we're busy in New York too, But it's busy in a different way. You have actual government duties from 5:30 until you are sleepy. You have duties. You have to do, my students, for example, had to do great leader study duty. And then they have to go do a gardening duty, like pulling weeds. They don't use a lawnmower for a reason. If people do it all the time, you're busy. They had to count spoons. And I never really know why they had to count spoons in this. And so all these duties take up time, so you have no time to think. So if you are constantly having to do some random great leader duties all the time, and then you have no way of getting on the internet, first, remember, they only learn about the great leader. So their education is limited. So you have also learned nothing. From day one, my students didn't know anything. They would think that they would say things like they cloned the rabbit in 5th grade. So they would lie a lot, but they also didn't know there was a tunnel between England and France. Just the basic information. They had never seen pictures of Eiffel Tower or Taj Mahal. It was all blank. But they knew everything about the great leader. So if you have no education, you have military control, you are busy all the time, and you cannot go anywhere. In North Korea, there's a checkpost between each town. You cannot go to the next town without the government's permission. So you cannot go anywhere. Most of all, it's also a cult ideology. So great leader is not a president. It's more like a religion. So he owns your soul. So you're physically bound. Your soul is taken, and you're also scared because there's a military. Then there's nothing you can do.
Yeah. Okay, on that note, let's open up for question and answers. Paucity of time, we'll take 3 questions, and we'll see how we go. Yeah.
Hello. Hi, ma'am. So in 2014, one film called The Interview had released, and there was a hack on Sony Pictures. So the FBI had confirmed that North Korea was behind that. So for a film, it's like for media on North Korea, they are getting many threats. So has your book received any indirect or direct threat from North Korea? Have you been subject to threat?
Well, also the Sony hack, it's hard to know really if it was North Korea. The State Department immediately said it was. So why they did that immediately without really, I don't know what kind of investigation they did in order to conclude that. But I did get a lot of threats, for the book. But, being there was far more scary than getting threats outside. So in a way, it didn't seem as urgent.
Hello. Actually, my question is answered, but still, are they not imprisoned on the account of sedition, things like that? Even they don't have internet, they'll get to know some information about you from South Korean internet, things like that. You're not imprisoned, things like that. And I got threats about it. And do you think, please wait. Yeah. Do you think the North Korea has got capacity to destroy America? Do they have so much of ammunition? And what is their ship base? And is it possible that North Korea can destroy a big country like America?
Thanks.
Well, I think the concern with North Korea is a complicated one because physically, they are a nuclear nation. They have the capability. But remember, it's right next to China. So this is really a Cold War between the US and China. So North Korea is pretty much, I think, for the United States, a diplomatic nightmare. So North Korea acting as a rogue to destroy America, unless it's a complete suicide, that's not going to happen. But I think that possibility will constantly be used by them in order to basically, it's like dealing with a thug who's constantly going to ask you to pay them off. And that's what the surrounding countries have been doing for decades. Don't mistake that this has not been happening forever. South Korea is always paying them off. And China, it's like they don't want to deal with it. It's like the worst headache right next to them. And Japan is like, please do not come anywhere near us. So all these surrounding countries, it's just their nightmare. But I think we forget. We think of North Korea as this nuclear tension place with a crazy leader. But think about 25 million people stuck there living in that way. The world I was describing, where you're not allowed to do anything that human beings are supposed to do, the basic freedom to walk out of your house and go to the next town, they can't do it. And if you could, I think that is an urgent human rights crisis.
Thank you. Sorry. We'll move to the next question.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that very, very moving presentation. And the question I wanted to ask you relates to the history that you were tracing about the division of the country. What made Vietnam was also on that same trajectory as far as the Cold War and the North-South divide. What do you think? And of course, China, you just spoke about China. And what do you think the role of China and how did things go slightly differently for Vietnam and why did Korea end up like this?
You know, I do think this is, I think it's a question I think about a lot because really the most outrageous thing I think about North Korea is what those people have been living under for 70 years. It's a gulag and a concentration camp, ongoing today. So why has it sunken to this degree? And I think at the end of the day, it's a rise of really a horrible, just absolute ruthless dictatorship is what happened. The degree of which we have never seen to this degree, there's that, and there's a complicity of every surrounding nations. And I think it's the biggest hypocrisy for them to sit there and pretend that we're solving the Korean problem, or even the South Korean president to suddenly pretend there's a peace on the peninsula. Really? What kind of peace is that if the 25 million people are living that way? And I think all the surrounding countries wanted to just be safe in their own nations and just allowed North Korea to grow and grow and grow this way. And what we have now, I don't know how we can reverse that. Because it's a fundamental cult. That's what we have in North Korea. And there's no way, I do really believe tragedy has a time limit. You cannot undo this. It's irrevocable. You know, people think Koreans can reunite and everybody will be happy together, but what about the people who've been born and raised in this system for 3 generations, who've learned nothing but the great leader stuff? I mean, how are you gonna have South Korean population suddenly be happy with the North Korean population? I mean, it's really a large, horrible problem that I think nobody wants to deal with.
Thank you. One last question.
Yeah, to your left. Yeah. So, first of all, I think really appreciate your courage, and so many years you have spent in North Korea. The question is, where does the government earn revenue out of? Because I understand the economy would be in shambles. The boys, typically from 17 to 27, at the ripe age, they work only for the military. What is the revenue? Where does the revenue for the government come from? Is it agriculture? Is it, I don't know, IT? Is it creating nuclear arsenal? Or what is it? I mean, where does the government earn their money from?
Well, North Korea, there is no economy really to speak of. So government doesn't take care of its citizens at all. Like nobody earns anything. So if the government actually is not providing anything for the people, then there's a lot of underhanded dealings also. There's a coal that it sells to China. And although sanctions would forbid it, but sanctions really don't mean that much at the border region. There's a lot of underhanded business. North Korea has been accused of, drug sales or weapon selling. So there's a lot of things that are happening that are not recorded at all. But most of all, it's also because there is just no infrastructure. They're not spending any money on the people. And there's a lot of aid. I mean, that's pretty much what people do, citizens sort of live on.
Okay, that's a wrap. Thank you so much for coming, and thank you, Suki Kim, for such a beautiful account, personal and journalistic.
A big thank you to Ms. Kim and Mr. Lakshman for that slightly scary but very informative session. Our guests will be available for book signing on the ground floor. Request members of the audience to please exit through the back door.